Perfect. Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and welcome to the inaugural session of the Rethinking Pakistan Forum. My name is Arif Shahid, and I serve as the president of the Pakistani Students Association Coalition, a collective of Pakistani students and Pakistani student organizations across the United States, committed to celebrating our rich cultural heritage, fostering intellectual dialogue, strengthening our student community, and reimagining the role of Pakistan's youth in shaping the country's future. Today, we mark the launch of the Rethinking Pakistan Forum, an entirely student led initiative dedicated to challenging conventional narratives, fostering bold ideas, and crafting actionable solutions to Pakistan's most pressing and pertinent issues. The forum goes beyond dialogue. It is about action and impact. It aims to bring together policymakers, people from academia, government, and civil society to shape a future that does not merely navigate crises, but transcends them with resilience, vision, and purpose. At its core, RPF will serve as a platform for critical conversations, culminating in an annual conference that unites thought leaders, policymakers, and students to collaboratively rethink Pakistan's trajectory and chart pathways towards prosperity and progress. But this journey begins today, hopefully with this discussion. We draw inspiration from Ambassador Maleeha Lodhi's seminal book, Pakistan Beyond the Crisis State, a work that remains as relevant today as when it was first published in 2011. As we engage in today's discussion, we seek not just to analyze challenges, but to rethink our responses, to rediscover what makes Pakistan a nation of promise and purpose. To everyone here, our esteemed panelists, Ambassador Maleeha Lodhi, Ambassador Munir Akram, and Ambassador Akbar Ahmed, passionate students and thought leaders, your presence is a testament to the belief that Pakistan's future is ours to shape. And today we take the first step. Thank you for being a part of this journey. With that, I will now hand over to Myra Ahmed, who is the vice chair for the forum, to formally begin the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alib. Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and a very warm welcome to today's thought-provoking discussion. It's truly an honor to inaugurate the RPF with such distinguished speakers. Ambassador Lodhi, Ambassador Akram, and Ambassador Ahmed, thank you so very much for joining us. Today, we'll be delving into the critical themes of Ambassador Maleeha Lodhi's seminal book, Pakistan, the Crisis State, published in 2011. While over a decade has passed since its publication, many of the challenges outlined in the book, governance, economic instability, geopolitical tensions, remain just as relevant today. With our distinguished panelists, we'll explore pressing questions around reform, resilience, and navigating an increasingly polarized global order. By reflecting on historical lessons and drawing insights for the future, we hope to chart a forward-looking vision for progress. I will now take a moment to formally introduce our esteemed panelists before we begin our discussion. Ambassador Maleeha Lodhi is a trailblazing diplomat and author, and the first and only woman to serve as Pakistan's ambassador and permanent representative to the United Nations in New York. Ambassador Lodhi has twice served as Pakistan's ambassador to the United States and has also served as the High Commissioner to the United Kingdom. In 1994, she was recognized by Time magazine as one of the 100 global leaders shaping the 21st century. Ambassador Lodhi has authored several books, including Pakistan, The Search for Stability, published last year, and is also the recipient of the Hilal Imtiaz for her remarkable service. Welcome back, Ambassador Lodhi. It's great to have you here again. His Excellency Ambassador Munir Akram is Pakistan's permanent representative to the United Nations, a role he previously held from 2002 to 2008. A seasoned diplomat, he has twice served as president of the United Nations Security Council and chaired the United Nations Economic and Social Council as well. His leadership focuses on advancing peace, security, and sustainable development, strengthening Pakistan's role in multilateral diplomacy. Last but certainly not least, Ambassador Akbar Ahmed is a renowned scholar, diplomat, and author. He served as Pakistan's High Commissioner to the UK and Ireland and is the Ibn Khaldun Chair of Islamic Studies at American University. Having taught the prestigious Harvard and Princeton universities, he is a leading voice in interfaith dialogue and global peace. His forthcoming autobiography, From Waziristan to Washington, reflects his lifelong commitment to bridging communities. Thank you all very much for taking the time to join us today. It is our privilege to facilitate such an important dialogue with the country's most distinguished diplomats. I'd now like to hand over to our moderators, Nabiha Ahmed, RPF's Vice Chair of Programs, Abuzer Sohaib, RPF's Director of Student and Youth Initiatives, Zaid Riaz, RPF's Director of Direct Outreach and Partnerships, and Hanan Yusuf, a student at Yale University and an RPF member. Over to you guys.
Thank you very much, Myra, for that wonderful introduction and for setting the stage for today's discussion. As we reflect on Jinnah's vision and the Pakistan that he aspired to build, it is so important to recognize the country's journey, its triumphs and its trials alike. While modern-day Pakistan has faced so many challenges, there have also been areas of progress that align well with ideals of Jinnah that he laid out in his speeches and policies. With that in mind, I'd like to ask our distinguished speakers, in your opinion, what is one aspect of modern-day Pakistan that Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah would be proud of? We will start with Ambassador Lodhi, then move to Ambassador Akram, and finally to Ambassador Ahmed. Ambassador Lodhi, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I just wanted to make one quick point about the book itself, which has inspired you to hold this session. The book is really called Beyond the Crisis State. It's not the crisis state. And the reason I did that was to, in a way, express hope that our country can get beyond the crisis state. But as, the person who introduced the book, she said it's still relevant today. And the reason it's still relevant is that while our hope is still there, Pakistan hasn't been able to move beyond the crisis state. It still lurches from one crisis to another, sadly. Now, to answer your question, I'll keep it short. I think Jinnah would look at the country today and admire something that's been there. I think it's not just a reflection of modern day Pakistan, but it's been there for over 7 decades. And that is the resilience of the Pakistani people, a people who have braved the odds, a people who have had to go through so many challenges, who had to, a large number of people have had to live in poverty, cost of living crisis, which is with us today, in fact, affecting all sections of society. So I think he would look at the country and say, what resilience? Here are people who are able to deal with mega floods. They're able to deal with an earthquake. And we've had more than one, but there was a major one, 15 years ago or something like that. And people who've had to suffer bad governance, bad rulers, indifferent elites, and who've had to also put up with what I believe is elite capture of our country, of our state, which has kept people illiterate, many people illiterate, which has kept our country underdeveloped, unable to realize its enormous and promising potential. So I would say that he would look down and say, I gave you a country. And I said, it's up to you what you make of this country. Now go, do it. And he would sort of, in a way say, well, I can see the state of the country, but my God, look at these people. They still keep the faith. They believe in Pakistan. They want a better Pakistan. They want a Pakistan that reflects the wishes of the people and also has a government that's legitimate, elected, and is able to govern the way they should govern in a democracy. Because I think Jinnah Akbar would know more about this, but Jinnah really did believe in constitutional rule. He believed in democracy. He believed in people's power. So I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Now to Ambassador Akram, please.
Well, I think what Jinnah would be proud of Pakistan is the spirit of his young people, the motivation of our young people at this stage, seeking to promote equity, seeking to promote justice within the country. And I think this is the spirit that Jinnah would be proud of. And I hope that that spirit will keep alive among our young people, and that we will tread on the path towards good governance, towards justice, towards equity. I think that's the important path towards development in Pakistan. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador, for kind words and insights. Now, finally, off to Ambassador Ahmed, please.
Thank you. First of all, let me congratulate Arib and his wonderful team, many of which we can see today. I'm very honored to be on the panel with Dr. Maleeha Lodhi and my friend Ambassador Munir Akram, both great diplomats and representatives of Pakistan. And Maleeha, of course, is always so intellectually vibrant and active. Thank you, Maleeha. Thank you for asking me to be part of your Jinnah project. So for me, who spent a lot of my time in the last few decades looking at precisely this question, in my latest play, Gandhi and Jinnah Return Home, which was filmed and then shown at the Karachi Literary Festival last year, early in the year, the question I raised was, how would Jinnah look at Pakistan today? And simultaneously, how would Gandhi look at India today? For Jinnah, my sense is that being an intellectual, being analytic, he would look at Pakistan and feel that Pakistanis have something that only he could give us. Only his life and his life's achievement could give us, which is a sense of achievement and identity. So if there had been no Jinnah, we would have had a very different identity. Now, of course, he wasn't alone. He was an embodiment of a great movement, and there were people starting with Sayyid Ahmad Khan. For a century, they'd been building up to it, but he personified it. So if you have an idea, and he had the idea of a Pakistan, and you have territory, Pakistan state, you have identity, which is what we had, Pakistan identity. For better or for worse, as Dr. Lodhi has pointed out, we've had many, many challenges, and we still do. And we are not even sure how we will emerge. We all have faith in the youth, but we know how they're struggling and what challenges they're facing. So we, the older generation, certainly I'm much older than the other two distinguished panelists, we can only pray and hope that they succeed. We haven't done a very good job. I hope they do a better job. But at the same time, it helps them to understand that they cannot move to the future without understanding the past, without understanding that what Jinnah did in 1947, which is to create the largest Muslim state in the world, was an achievement that in history to me is unparalleled, because look at what's happening in Gaza right now. The Palestinians had an idea, the idea of their own state. And 70 or 80 years later, like Pakistan's history, they haven't even got 1 square yard which they can call their own. And the answer is Jinnah's success, not through violence, not through hostage taking and violence and murder and assassinations, but through the constitution, through legal means. That was his greatest achievement. So I think in that sense, the identity he gave us as Pakistanis, all of you students on campus are aware that there'll be Indian societies and Japanese society, and you have a Pakistani society. For better or for worse, that is your society. You can do with it what you want. You can take it up to the skies or mess it up. That is your choice. That is what he gave us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ambassadors, for your insightful reflections. As we examine Jinnah's vision in the context of today's Pakistan, it becomes evident that while progress has been made, significant challenges remain in realizing the ideals that he championed. Building on this discussion, we now turn to a deeper exploration of Jinnah's vision and its relevance today. Now I'll hand it over to Abuzar, who will introduce our next theme, Pakistan's founding vision and the core ideals that continue to shape its trajectory. Why Jinnah or Jinnah's legacy matters. Abuzar, off to you.
Thank you so much, Zaid, and thank you all to all of the panelists who are here speaking so thoroughly on all of these issues. मैं बस आगाज़ इस बात से करना चाहूँगा कि हम सब ने फरिया परवेज़ की आवाज़ में सुना है, यूं दी हमें आज़ादी के दुनिया हुई हैरान, ए कायदे आज़म तेरा एहसान है एहसान. But diving a little deeper into the second chapter of this book, which is specifically about why Jinnah matters. I'm going to turn towards Ambassador Ahmed first. So, given the exodus of Parsis, persecution of Hindus, systemic marginalization of Christians, what lessons can we learn from Jinnah to foster a more inclusive society today? How can cultural initiatives inspired by your work rebuild trust among Pakistani minorities? Over to you.
A very simple lesson. It's a very important question you raised, but the lesson is very, very simple and absolutely essential to the moral well-being of Pakistan and Pakistanis. And they have to take it more seriously and not do this window dressing, which is often done. The treatment of the minorities, and I'm in touch with the Christians and the Hindus and so on, is appalling in Pakistan today and is cited. We're living in the age of the media. Instantly, you hear these terrible stories. You hear them on the other side of the border also, but that does not justify what happens in Pakistan because that negates the very idea and argument for Pakistan. Now, Quaid-e-Azam's vision, I think you've all seen and heard his speech, the first speech he gave in the Constituent Assembly, clarified exactly what his vision was. You can go to your temples, you can go to your churches. He spends the first and only Christmas, December 47, in a church with Christians. His vision is very clear. Pakistan is going to be a pluralist state. Pakistan will be inspired by the principles, as he mentioned, the Holy Prophet of Islam, but it will be pluralist, and that is the vision. And the vision is clearly enunciated in the two speeches, the first one and the second one in the Constituent Assembly. Now, there's a big debate about this because there's always a debate about interpretations of Islam. But to me, who studied Quaid-e-Azam for decades now, in my book, Jinnah, Pakistan and Islamic Identity, I try to create a model of a leader like Jinnah who's aspiring to something, aspiring to an ideal. And it's difficult because when you aspire to an ideal, you may achieve it, you may only half achieve it, but you move towards that ideal. So the subtitle of my book is called The Search for Saladin. And Salahuddin or Saladin, I use very deliberately as symbolic again, because in history, he's again a leader who actually succeeds in recapturing Jerusalem from the Crusaders. And in that sense, he goes down in history. And he's very kind and pluralistic and generous to his enemies. Again, a great model for us today, considering what's happening in the Middle East. So these are great examples we have, and we can, this generation, your generation, can learn from these great examples and do not neglect this side of his character. I know we make Quaid-e-Azam into a sort of fundamentalist warrior straight down from the passes, the Khyber passes, but read him in the context of which he lived and thought, and he comes across as a very sophisticated, open-minded, and pluralist leader of a multicultural, multi-religious society, which is what he wanted.
Thank you so much for that wonderful answer. Ambassador Ahmed, I'm going to turn towards Ambassador Akram. So talking more about Jinnah and his vision of a sovereign, self-reliant Pakistan, which would be capable of navigating global power dynamics while safeguarding its own national interests. However, external dependencies, economic vulnerabilities continue to limit Pakistan's long-term policymaking and governance. In your opinion, what diplomatic strategy should Pakistan initially adopt as a starting point to balance external pressures with domestic priorities, ensuring its sovereignty remains intact in an era of shifting alliances and increasing global economic dependencies?
Thank you. Well, I think there always has to be a balance between your economic priorities, your socio-economic priorities, and your security priorities. And Pakistan, fortunately or unfortunately, has faced both challenges, both economic challenges as well as security challenges. And on many occasions, the security challenges have triumphed over the economic priorities, and that's why we see the difficulties we are continuing to face. There are many countries which have found the balance between economic priorities and security priorities. And I think we need to find that right balance there are answers to both economic and security issues, which have been found by other countries. And Pakistan is quite capable of developing such strategies, which will both ensure its security as well as ensure its development. But you have to go down into the nuts and bolts of policy. And often we do not address ourselves to the nuts and bolts of policy that is required to respond to our needs. And I think that is what perhaps Jinnah would ask us to consider, is detailed policy, detailed work, hard work that is necessary to develop policies and implement policies. Thank you.
Thank you so much to both of the ambassadors. I am going to move on. After having examined Pakistan's founding vision and its evolving role on the global stage, we will now turn our focus inward to the governance challenges that have shaped the country's trajectory. To explore how Pakistan can strengthen its institutions, drive economic sustainability, and overcome structural hurdles, I'll hand it over to Maleeha. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Abdullah. So I know that we are constrained on time today, and all my questions are actually podcasts in and of themselves. But I would request if we could keep the answers a little bit brief, just so that the other students after me who have wonderful questions can get a chance to speak as well. So I see that a recurring theme in Pakistan's governance trajectory, as one of our ambassadors just also said, has been the struggle to balance economic sustainability, institutional strength, and long-term development. In my opinion, having read the chapter Beyond the Crisis State by Ambassador Lodhi, we can categorize Pakistan's governance challenges into three major areas. First being structural issues, we see this in the over-reliance on aid, a weak industrial base, and fiscal mismanagement. Then we have institutional weaknesses such as corruption, inefficiency in state-owned enterprises, and a lack of policy continuity with different political parties. The third is perhaps the neglected development priorities, which is underinvestment in human capital, rural development, and economic diversification. So my focus in today's conversation is to explore solutions to these very pertinent issues, because I feel that within our local media as well, we have quite a few discussions on the problem aspect of things. So Ambassador Lodhi, first to you. In Pakistan Beyond the Crisis State, you outlined 5 possible futures for Pakistan. And I understand that this was written in 2011, unfortunately, it's still relevant today. The first being elite-dominated stagnation. The second, populist-driven disorder. The third, a reformist turnaround. Fourth, security state entrenchment. And fifth, state failure. Based on where the country stands today in 2025, which of these paths seem most likely? And if Pakistan is to move forward towards long-term stability and progress, what's the most realistic first step, and what's the biggest challenge to making it happen?
I think one has to start first with the acknowledgement that Pakistan today faces a polycrisis, which means that several of its challenges are converging to create a much bigger challenge than any single one of them. So that's a polycrisis. And that's because the chickens have come home to roost. That's because of postponed reforms. And above all, it's because of a non-reformist elite and a narrow elite that has run this country and continues to run this country. So I think some of the fault lines that I identified in that chapter still hold. Some new ones have been added, but the old ones still persist. So I don't want to list all of them, but I do want to say that what is stifling our development, our progress, our ability to deliver to our people what they want and what they deserve is elite capture. It's elite capture whose components are both civil and military. And I think the military is weighing far too heavily now on governance. This is distorting the whole governance system and the political structure of the country. And of course, the fact that we have in office today a government whose legitimacy is seriously in doubt. So, I mean, with that combination of factors where the bulk of the people who voted in the last election feel that they've been deprived of their vote. How do you deal with them? They're alienated, they're angry, they often come out and protest. And yet what we have is a situation where structural economic problems that you also mentioned, Nabiha, and that's one of the fault lines that persists. I like to use the phrase internal underreach and external overreach. We spend too much time looking outside and not enough time looking inwards to deal with our fundamental internal problems. So I think when you say which of the futures, I wish there was a more hopeful future. But here, just to throw out two or three statistics, which really says it all. 26 million children, school-going children in our country are out of school. It's a scandal. 40% of our people are still illiterate. 40% of our people live in poverty. 40% of under fives suffer from stunting. We are amongst the top countries in the world where children are stunted because of malnutrition, itself a reflection of poverty. What kind of a future is this for these children and for the young people of my country, of our country? This is not a hopeful future. So I'm afraid, the futures that you outline, it's the first one. We seem to be sleepwalking into social instability, more social instability, I should say. We're still we're unstable even right now. Plus the political disruptions that have taken place. Elections where the voters have been robbed of their vote. The military, as I said, not sticking to their professional role, trying to run the country, and often in a way that is not in its own interest. So, these are long-running structural issues. Unfortunately, they persist, remain unaddressed, and therefore do not create the vision of a hopeful future for Pakistan, which is unfair on the people of Pakistan, but there we are.
That's
And
unfortunate.
Nabia, with
Yes,
your
please.
permission, I'd like to jump in
Of
and
course.
on the back of Dr. Lodhi's comment, just to point out that Quaid-e-Azam in his speeches, and in my book I studied his speeches, very well worth doing, he constantly emphasized the corruption and the nepotism which can destroy a society. Dr. Lodhi had said the internal crisis, which can destroy society internally. And both of them, nepotism, corruption, are literally widespread in Pakistan. So if they're postings, transfers, promotions, they're very often based on nepotism, who you know, on corruption, the money you give people. And I'm very much in touch with Pakistan. I keep getting reports, and they are horrifying, because if that is the path we are taking, we will have major problems for your generation. So I agree with Dr. Lodhi. We have to look at ourselves very critically and go back to Quaid-e-Azam's vision and ask, have we even attempted to walk on that path? Lack of corruption, lack of nepotism, a clean society. He was so impeccable. Nabi, I'll give you an example. A close relative of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, the founder of the two-nation theory in terms of ideas, came to him to ask for a job after Pakistan. He was then Governor General. And imagine, he said, no, everyone must be selected on merit. He actually turned that down. And that person was very upset because he said, my great-grandfather and Sir Syed Ahmad. And he said, no, Pakistan must be based entirely on merit. That's an example for Pakistan today. Now, how many examples can you give me of that kind of behavior today? Very, very few.
And I'm glad that we're highlighting these and having this conversation, because hopefully this will serve as a start point for many more future discussions that are solution-centric. And hopefully in the coming days, we will be able to have more concentrated and deeper discussions with you guys as you expand on these points. Thank you so much for highlighting those, and Ambassador Ahmed for supplementing that. Ambassador Akram, Pakistan Beyond the Crisis State highlights governance failures, as Dr. Lodhi just mentioned, elite capture, weak institutions, and policy instability as key reasons for Pakistan's economic stagnation. The country remains stuck in a boom-bust cycle, repeatedly relying on short-term external bailouts as quick fixes instead of enacting real reforms. What is the most critical governance reform needed, in your opinion, to break this cycle and reduce dependencies on bailouts? And given the resistance from entrenched elite interests, how can Pakistan's leadership realistically implement these reforms?
Well, I think Pakistan has to take a very fundamental decision, which is, do we want to be self-sufficient, self-reliant, or do we want to rely on external support and handouts forever? I think, as you see many countries, once they take a decision that they want to be self-reliant, they go through difficult times, they go through difficulties, but they come out at the other end independent in policy, and therefore they are able to take the right decisions for their country. Our decisions, both on the economic side, sometimes on security side, are taken on short-term considerations, tactical considerations. And therefore, I think many times those tactical decisions are wrong because the long-term decisions have to be determined on the basis of what is in the interest of the country long-term. And that has to be on the basis of a country being an independent state and not a beggar state, which unfortunately is what we have become repeatedly. And I think we have to take that decision. One time or the other, we have to be self-reliant and go through the difficulties that are involved in becoming self-reliant.
Truly, sometimes the first step towards something is really looking inwards and clarifying with yourself if it is indeed something that you want to focus on. So thank you for highlighting that. Ambassador Ahmed, based on what you said earlier, my next question is actually connected to that. As we discussed in the first half as well, Pakistan's governance failures have not only weakened economic stability, but also alienated local communities from the decision-making sphere. As Dr. Lodhi has outlined in Pakistan Beyond the Crisis State, Ambassador Akbar, you have extensively written on the link between governance, societal trust, and state legitimacy. In your opinion, what's one practical reform that could give local communities a real stake in economic stability? And how can this reform be implemented in a way that ensures both top-level policymaker commitment and sustained grassroots participation?
Nabi, again, I'd fall back to the study of history. I'll give you an example of two of the greatest rulers of South Asia, who are called the Great. Well, first Ashoka, and second Akbar the Great. So these people had an approach to administration, an approach to their people, the question you raised. Akbar, for example, not many Pakistanis know this, ordered his governors to spend their free time in reading Rumi. Why reading Rumi? Because Rumi creates compassion and love for humanity. It's an embracing, it's a universal philosophy. Now just think of this. This is Akbar, a very strong military warrior. He's not just an emperor, he's also a very successful warrior. And he's asking his governors to be reading Rumi. There's a point there. As far as Ashoka is concerned, when I was assistant commissioner in Mansehra many years ago, outside the assistant commissioner's house, there were some huge rocks. And no one knew what the writing was. And I had them translated and boards put up there. That is Ashoka speaking to his people, right from the North Kashmir down to the south. It's a vast empire, the South Asian empire. And again, Ashoka is saying that even if the officer is in his bedchamber, if there's a darkhasti, a person with an application, he must see them and deal with them and solve their problems. So for me, it's crucial that Pakistanis go back to creating a good, clean administration. And unfortunately today, there's been a decline both in the civil service and the police services. Most of the services, I get feedback which is very depressing. Right now, I'm told by friends in the KP province that the TTP are more or less in control of the Mardan Charsadar roads. This is deep in Pakistan. We're not talking of the tribal areas. Pakistan cannot abdicate its territory because the next step is collapse of the state of government. So a strong administration, a clean administration, and not neglecting it. Right now, as Dr. Lodhi said, focuses on politics, the elite politics in and around Islamabad. You know, you'll get the chair, I'll get the chair, my Bhatija will get the chair. That's all that's happening. And the consequences are in front of you. No nation can continue doing this without heading towards the abyss. And the abyss is always something very dangerous. We've seen it. That is why, Nabi, I'll close with this, that Bangladesh, I was in East Pakistan as a young officer posted there in 71, and West Pakistanis looked down on East Pakistan as a backward province. They sort of had contempt for it, unfortunately. That resulted in the hatred East Pakistani developed for West Pakistan. And today, on every metric, education, health, industries, Bangladesh has overtaken Pakistan. And I ask myself, what happened? In the 60s, we were going in one direction, and now we're going in another direction. So Pakistan really has to do some hard thinking, pull up its socks and move ahead, or we're going to continue this path. There's no alternative to it. And we've talked rather optimistically about Pakistan's future, but take a look at the region. It's surrounded by countries that are not friendly. India, of course, we acknowledge that, but Afghanistan is very hostile, openly hostile now. Iran's exchanged missiles with us, and China is not particularly happy either. All the sounds that are coming out are of an unhappy uncle who may be slapping us on the wrist very soon, or is slapping us on the wrist. So how are we functioning? Enemies all around, chaos inside. What do we need? Do we need a Khomeini type of revolution, Mao type of revolution, or can we do something within society to clean up the mess and move it? And that is why, Navia, your generation, if it thinks, if it uses its mind, if it has these kinds of discussions, honest discussion, I think we are having a very honest discussion considering your very distinguished panel, two of the stars of the Pakistan Foreign Service. That's where you can learn and hopefully then take lessons for the future.
There are so many questions and so many comments that I'd love to follow up with you on based on what you just said. But unfortunately, due to time constraints, I will need to move forward. But thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for setting the stage for our next discussion, as we will now be focusing on the international front to discuss how Pakistan positions itself in a shifting global order. Hanan, over to you.
Thank you so much for everyone's comments, and Nabiha. I'm going to move on to chapter 15 of the book Pakistan's Place on the Global Stage. Having explored the domestic governance challenges that have shaped Pakistan's trajectory, I'm now going to turn towards Pakistan's place in the world. As the global power dynamics evolve and the region becomes more interconnected, Pakistan faces the challenge of redefining its role on the international stage. The emphasis on autonomy has been emphasized across the board from all of our panelists through these questions today, and Pakistan Beyond the Crisis State discusses the term strategic shrinkage to highlight the growing risk of Pakistan losing its global influence. This decline stems from internal stability manifested in a polycrisis, as mentioned by Ambassador Lodhi, bureaucratic and military structures, social breakdowns, and a failure to capitalize on opportunities for regional trade and economic partnerships has led to economic stagnation. So with all these issues in mind and everything that we've discussed so far, let's discuss solutions for restoring Pakistan's global standing and move Pakistan beyond the crisis state. I want to start with Ambassador Munir Akram, discussing Pakistan's geographic position. It's often cited as a strategic asset and one that many of our neighbors have successfully leveraged for economic and diplomatic gains. What specific project or initiative would you prioritize to turn this location into a tangible advantage, primarily to combat the aforementioned strategic shrinkage?
Well, I think that since that article and was written in the book, our strategic shrinkage has expanded, unfortunately. At that time, as I recall, we were looking for some kind of stability on our western border. We were looking for a dialogue with the United States. We had a fairly good relationship with China, and a difficult relationship, but nevertheless some form of stability with India. If you look at our situation today, I am very concerned that we are facing as Maleeha put it, a polycrisis, but it's a multiple geographical crisis. We're facing challenges from the northwest, the southwest, from the north, from the east. And of course, there is no assurance we will have a good relationship with the United States, and there is a fear that we have also disturbed our relationship with the Chinese. These are facts which have been sort of conjectured publicly as such. So I'm not saying anything new as such, but we have to find a step-by-step policy direction to address all these multi-dimensional crises. I think the easiest is for us to find a way of living with the Taliban in Afghanistan. I think there is a strategic convergence. I think the differences with the Taliban we can overcome them. We have common interests. I think Afghanistan can be our strategic connection with Central Asia. So I think that's the easiest issue. Similarly, with Iran, I don't think that there are fundamental issues that divide us with Iran. And likewise, I think our problems with China are, frankly, of our own making. We can analyze that further, but of our own making. With the US, unfortunately, I think we are going to have a difficult time. I think the Trump administration, the direction, its strategic relationship with India, the fact that India is completely all over the place in this administration, it's going to spell difficulties for Pakistan, and we have to see how to limit the damage, how to limit the fallout that could happen on Pakistan. So it's a damage limitation strategy as such. So that's broadly, as I see it, the kind of policies we need. Pakistan has a 360-degree foreign policy. I think we have to address each one of these problems. And some are easier, some are more difficult, but we have to address them all simultaneously. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that and the insight on Afghanistan and Iran. I'm going to move to my next question for Ambassador Maleeha Lodhi. In today's polarized global landscape with major powers like the US and China competing for influence, how should Pakistan navigate these competing interests while preserving its strategic autonomy? So kind of to piggyback off of what Munir Akram said.
Yeah, Hanan, I would like to respond briefly to a question that you asked Munir. Of course, he answered very comprehensively. But I do want to say, because you talked about location
Yes.
as being an asset. Well, I've long argued that it was an asset and a challenge, and that we underestimated the challenge because we lived in a rough and tough neighborhood with I think, contested borders, difficult neighbors. So I'm not too sure whether I would sort of celebrate our location from that perspective. I think if countries had a chance to move out of their neighborhood, I would have said Pakistan should have moved out of this neighborhood, but we couldn't. So we have to be very careful. And also, I think, recognize, because there's been too much focus on location, we have to recognize that the era of geopolitical rents is over. This is what our foreign policy was all about for decades. It was how we could secure geopolitical rents from our location. And therefore, relationships, for example, that we forged during various phases with America were predicated not on Pakistan's intrinsic importance, but on something else. Geopolitical storms, the Cold War, Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, American invasion of Afghanistan. It wasn't about us. It was about something else. It was a function of a third country. So I think the time has come now, one, for us to get over this location fixation. Fine. I mean, there is something to be said about it, but we have to build intrinsic strength We have to economically empower ourselves. All foreign policy, I say in every lecture, in every talk, begins at home. It does not begin outside. And if it begins at home, there is only one way that we can respond to what you're talking about, the changes that are occurring at an amazing speed in the world. How do we respond to all of that? We respond to all of that first by strengthening ourselves domestically, by ensuring that we have the ability then to have an effective foreign policy. I mean, for example, this is said to be also something that you didn't mention. You talked about the US China standoff, and I think there it's very clear. Pakistan's strategic priority is with China. We see our strategic future to be linked to China. The United States, yes, we would like a good, normal relationship with them, but because the US sees us through both China's lens as well as India's lens, I think the space for a Pakistan-US relationship is very, very limited. And I agree with Munir, there are difficult days ahead. So I think the first thing we need to do, which we have not done for, as far as I remember, Munir can correct me if I'm wrong, as far as I remember, for over 20 years, our country has not undertaken a wide-ranging foreign policy review. I remember the last one was undertaken under a military dictator, President Musharraf. Never happened again. So here are all these changes taking place, and we are dealing with these issues in silos. And we still think that our location will bail us out somehow, that something will happen somewhere. And then we'll turn around to the world and say, see, we're so important. Why don't you come and secure our cooperation? I'm sorry, that kind of thinking has to go. There has to be new think. There has to be a new way of conceptualizing how we want to deal with the world. And I think above all, I would say, and I'll end on this note, I think one of the most alarming things, I think Munir sort of referred to it, but I just want to add to it. You know, for almost 6-7 decades, Pakistan's security and foreign policy was predicated on averting a two-front situation, which meant that we didn't want hot borders with two of our neighbors. Today, we are in a situation where we have difficult, unstable, unsettled borders with 3 neighbors. I think that shows the failure of Pakistan's current leadership, at least, that they've not been able to diffuse one front. And I agree entirely with Munir that, you know, countries have to make tactical adjustments to ensure that they are able to secure their strategic aims. And here the tactical adjustment has to be to diffuse the tensions with Afghanistan. I'm no friend of the Taliban. I'm no fan of the Taliban. As a woman, I can't be. There's no way I can be. But I also believe in realpolitik. I believe in the interests of the state are more important than my personal views or my gender for that matter. So I think we need to fix that. We need an outreach to Iran and not be fearful about what other countries would say, or a certain country would say. Iran has a reformist president, and there's a huge opportunity for us to have a better relationship. So I think we need to fix ourselves first in our neighborhood before we start to think of ourselves as some big time player on the international scene. And lastly, I would say Pakistan has the potential of being a middle power, because this is an era of middle powers. And middle powers are countries that have certain attributes that enable them to shape global geopolitics. Turkey is a middle power. Saudi Arabia is a middle power. Singapore is a middle power. Qatar is a middle power. So it has nothing to do with population. It has to do with your attributes. So we have the potential, but we are not a middle power, because as Munir has also written in this chapter, I mean, talk about strategic shrinkage. I mean, our international relevance is at an all-time low, because our 3 key relationships are predicated now on asking for money. China, can you give us some more money? Saudi Arabia, can you put some more deposits in our central bank? UAE, can you roll over another loan, please? This is the nature of our foreign policy. This is a disgrace. I'll end there.
Thank you so much. I love how you reframe Pakistan's location and emphasize the need for tactical adjustments, especially going off of what Munir Akram discussed. Thank you so much, Ambassador Munir Akram and Ambassador Maleeha Lodhi, for your insightful perspectives on Pakistan's evolving role on the global scale and how we need to look inwards as well. Your analysis on this economic diplomacy, strategic partnerships, and balancing our global alliances provides much needed clarity as Pakistan navigates this increasingly complex international landscape. We are incredibly grateful to all of our esteemed speakers for sharing their expertise and reflections with us today. Ambassador Lodhi, Ambassador Akram, and Ambassador Ahmed, thank you for engaging in this critical conversation and offering invaluable insights into Pakistan's governance, diplomacy, and future trajectory. Unfortunately, we are short on time and we couldn't dive into everything as much as we would have liked, but today's discussion has laid such an important foundation for the conversations and collaborations to come. And with that, I would like to hand this over to Myra to formally wrap up today's session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hanan. Ambassador Lodhi, Ambassador Ahmed, and Ambassador Akram, thank you all so very much for joining us today. As we conclude the first session of the Rethinking Pakistan Forum, it is clear that while Pakistan continues to grapple with significant challenges, it also possesses the resilience and the potential to move forward. Today's discussion and the RPF more broadly is evidence of our collective willingness to work for progress. Ultimately, ye lazim hai ki hum bhi dekhenge. A heartfelt thank you once again to our esteemed speakers, Ambassador Maleeha Lodhi, Ambassador Munir Akram, and Ambassador Akbar Ahmed, for sharing their insights and experiences. Your contributions were truly invaluable, and I think we will all step away from the session with a renewed approach to Pakistan's trajectory. I'd also now like to take an opportunity to thank the Rethinking Pakistan Forum team for their dedication to organizing this event. A special thank you to Nabiha for her tireless efforts both on and off camera in devising and hosting today's discussion. Thank you also to Abuzer, Hanan, and Zaid for their flawless moderation. And most importantly, as always, thank you to Arib, the president of the PSA Coalition and the RPF chair, whose leadership, vision, and unwavering commitment make these events possible. And today's discussion is one step in a broader endeavor to critically examine Pakistan's trajectory. It is our hope that the ideas shared here today will resonate far beyond the confines of this event, sparking continued dialogue and action. We'll actually be hosting another event this Saturday titled Digital Pakistan, Technology Transformation and Entrepreneurship, and hope to see many of you there as well. Once again, thank you all for joining us. Allah Hafiz and Pakistan Zindabad.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.